Good night, Gromit.
Good night, Gromit.
I love a bit of Gorgonzola.
Oh my god, you do the voice so well,
Thank you.
you also do the fucking Hutch voice so well. Like I can hear the difference in your voice between your regular Wallace voice and your Hutch voice.
The Hutch voice needs more like reverb.
Gorgonzola.
You know what the best line is? I think this was arson. Yes, someone arson around. What are you lot?
That's this podcast right now.
I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
You're listening to Deep Cut.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss the director's life and career to bring context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Before we get into this episode talking about Nick Park's 2005 animated feature, Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, please remember to give us a rating or a review and subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. This will help others discover the show. You can also keep up with us at Deep Cut Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd, and Deep Cut Pod _film on TikTok. And if you want to talk about this movie with us or any other film, TV, drop a hello, music, please join us on our Discord server. And if you are a big fan of the show, we've also recently launched a Patreon. If you want to help support us, you can click the link in the description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials we've mentioned here.
Hearing you say that The Curse of the Were-Rabbit came out in 2005 is kind of rocking me. I won't reveal my exact age, but it means that I was so familiar with Wallace and Gromit by 2005 when I was very young that I saw this movie in theaters and loved it and had such a good time revisiting it. I almost feel like there's no episode that needs to happen because this is just a perfect, delightful movie. I love Curse of the Were-Rabbit.
Can you tell me what cinema it was? I want to picture you. I have seen a picture of Eli maybe around that age as a child. I've seen a picture of Eli as a child. Not in a weird way. I've just been to your home. I've been to your home. And also not in a weird way.
I was there. He was there when I was there.
Yeah.
But also not in a weird way.
I'm going to visually hold up the number of fingers for how old I was when I saw this movie.
Okay.
So young.
What cinema did you go to? Do you remember?
It probably was... So I didn't grow up in New York. I grew up in suburban Massachusetts. So It would have been a local theater, I think a couple towns over, which I know is now closed. But it was called the Showcase Cinemas. I have a very clear spatial memory of that theater's lobby.
It's like a classic, American, a little rundown,
and like a strip mall,
old cinema. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
next to a gas
That's just
station.
way too big.
Yeah,
I don't know why. Why is it so big? No one's coming here. They're in the theater. I don't understand. We don't have the luxury here.
Space. It's America, man. It's America.
Seeing Curse of the Were-Rabbit on the most massive screen you can imagine.
Damn.
IMAX.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, I remember at the time seeing the movie and loving it, of course, and then being shocked when kids my age were saying it was too scary.
Oh, really?
Which maybe teed up or was a hint of my love of horror from a young age. But this is not scary.
It is not scary, but I would say that it does draw very beautifully from horror conventions.
Yeah.
I think it is a really good riff on the horror genre, which I really enjoyed. I think that was one of my favorite elements of this because I think it's hard for me to separate or like see this as a vastly different entity than the 3 other shorts that we watched last week.
Agreed.
But I think the plays on different genres that Nick Park does in the other shorts, he sort of repeats here. So I think that was quite exciting about Were Rabbit.
I mean, they all kind of are pulling from these genre parodies, I guess. It's really what it is. And playing with it within this Wallace and Gromit universe and like making it funny and just arsing around in those genres. You know, like that's kind of the modus operandi of like the Wallace and Gromit world. It's just, let's just make this genre and just muck around a little bit. Make it a kind of a big joke. One question would be like, this is kind of the deep cut episode, if you want to call it, or maybe it's not. Is this the popular pick? I don't know. And when we were planning this, we realized Nick Park has not directed many features at all because he's only done the shorts, Early Man from 2018 and Chicken Run from 2000.
Oh, Chicken Run is so good.
And Chicken Run is also very good.
We should do Chicken Run.
Because Chicken Run, I remember running on the television just constantly when I was a kid. I don't know why. They just kept playing it on broadcast TV, like with ads and stuff. Yeah, like that's how I experienced Chicken Run. Just like, I think I must have seen bits and pieces of it like 20 times over. So Chicken Run I remember, and I came into Wallace and Gromit way, way later, and I didn't really make the connection. And I guess I was like, oh yeah, this is all claymation, looks the same, but obviously, no, it doesn't. This is the style of this claymation, and it just looks like this.
Yeah.
Their faces, their mouths, they just happen to look like that because that's the style that they went for. Yeah.
So in all these Wallace and Gromit movies, there's the genre send up, there are clever action set pieces, there's setup and payoff, and Wallace and Gromit are always working a new kind of job. In Curse of the Were-Rabbit, they are pest control, specifically for rabbits, which are terrorizing the vegetable crop of the township that Wallace and Gromit live in, which is especially problematic because there's an upcoming vegetable competition at Lady Toddington's manor.
Totty.
She's played by Helena Bonham Carter, or voiced by Helena Bonham Carter. And her would-be suitor is Victor Quatermain, voiced by Ray Fiennes.
Yeah.
In an incredible turn. So it's clear from the start that Wallace has a crush on Totty, and Victor Quatermain is his rival, even though Wallace doesn't really realize that. And they're also trying to control the town's rabbit problem. Wallace gets an idea to brainwash the rabbits into not liking vegetables. One of the rabbits, Hutch, winds up mind melding with Wallace because the technology, of course, goes awry. And all of a sudden, there's a mysterious were-rabbit that comes out in the full moon and eats even more of the town's vegetables. All of a sudden, fingers are being pointed at Wallace and Gromit, anti-pesto, pest control. Victor Quatermain wants to shoot the rabbit, and it all comes to a head in the vegetable competition. The stakes are both high and extremely low.
Yeah.
And it's full of the same delightful humor and that classic Wallace and Gromit dynamic. I've also noticed that they wind up often getting separated in each of these films, and then the reunion back together is very cathartic, and I think this time especially. So what do you both think upon watching Curse of the Were-Rabbit?
I don't really have a strong recollection of when I saw this before. I just knew that I had seen it. For me, I really like stop motion. When I was like getting into cinema, I was really into stop motion and claymation, and so I was like getting into it, and that's why I started watching this film, and also I guess some like Nightmare for Christmas, that kind of stuff, which I think I mentioned before. I guess watching it this time, it felt like fresh again. And if I was watching a new one, and with the context of the shorts now, like it feels off that same vein, but with like a bigger production budget, I guess, like the lighting and all that, like really feels very polished. That you can really tell compared to the shorts.
Yeah.
Yes.
And yet, I think compared to other stop motion, because it's claymation, you still feel its handmade quality. Those fingerprints are still there on their faces. Things just don't always match up right. And it's fine because you want to believe that these things are moving and talking on their own. And for some reason, this time I was really obsessed with looking at people's teeth. Like the way, like I was like, my God, every time you do open the mouth, you got to put the teeth back in. And like, how are you doing this? Like every single time someone's mouth opens, I'm like, that's a lot of work. Like, how big are these teeth? And I think my only, not say qualm, but I think compared to the shorts, I think the shorts are so much denser in ideas in a way that is just sublime. Whereas this one kind of like luxuriates in its longer runtime. It's 85-minute runtime, where it's able to kind of slowly get to its point. But in that sense, it kind of loses a bit of that paciness that the shorts have, and that kind of just throwing all kinds of ideas at you constantly. Whereas this one feels a bit looser, it feels simpler, and for some reason, I guess, feels almost smaller than the shorts. The shorts have such big ideas, and this one has big concepts, but as like in terms of number of set pieces, it's kind of doing about the same amount that the shorts do in half the time, which is insane. Not to say it's a bad film, but in a way I was like kind of wished it was like a short times 2 amount of like stuff going on, like some amount of ideas, but it really isn't. It's still just one idea, but it's still a very well executed one idea.
To just piggyback off of your initial, like your reaction to this, I also really liked watching this, and I thought the production value, like I think the first thing I wrote down, I was like, oh wow, DreamWorks logo.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like, look at that step up. And then right in that opening scene, you have a POV shot from the were-rabbit's perspective, and I was like, oh, this camera's moving very smoothly.
Yeah,
like they're probably like on like a robot or something that's like controlling the movement. So I like how polished it feels visually, and I think not that it like enveloped me more in the film itself, but I think there was like less moments where I was taken out by like, oh my God, these are hands, or like hands move these. Animation wise, it moved a lot smoother for me. So I was very into it. But similarly to Ben, I really feel like this could have been told in 30 minutes. And I think just stretching it out to 85 minutes is great on one hand, because you're like, I get to spend a lot of time with these characters that are quite lovable. I think I still don't like Wallace. Well, I don't know if you're not
He's
like meant to, right? You're not meant to, but I think it's still like, I think it frustrates me more than the regular viewer to like see him for a long period. So I'm also happy that he was MIA for decent chunks of this film. Like, I think it was healthy for the film to like exist without Wallace's like stupidity for a few minutes. And I love that fucking dog, man. I love that dog. But I'm still like mulling it over. But I think I'm not as hot on it as I was on some of the shorts, except for the earliest short. That's how I would rank them.
To me, that crucial difference that you're both noting in terms of the runtime and perhaps that padded out feel is the expansion of the cast of characters and the broader community, which I really love because it's really clever humor constantly. Like, it's packing in jokes instead of perhaps ideas, which the shorts do more, which is a step away from the shorts, but I happen to really enjoy it. I also see how it is different and not the same sort of Wallace and Gromit contract as the shorts.
I think with the shorts, it's always about inventiveness, like stuff that you can see.
Yeah.
And here, a lot of the jokes tend to be language jokes, which I fucking love still.
So
you know what I mean?
So
I love puns. I freaking love puns. But in a way, it's kind of like, I love puns, but like with Wallace and Gromit, the fun stuff is the stuff I can see, not the things I can hear. And so that's like the thing, and I'm like, yeah, I really enjoy that, but like, I kind of want to see the visual gags more. And there are visual gags in this, but it's more of like how people do stuff that's fun. For example, like how the sheep move, like that's interesting. Or like the heist, that's interesting. The train cards, that's interesting to look at. Here it's like, the gags are more like, here's like a thing to look at, and the gag is just like a sign, you know what I mean? Or like a pun, you know? And I still love all that on its own, but that's less of the special sauce that those shorts had, which was a lot about like letting you see how something happens with clay rather than like, here's like a broad gag. But yeah, I'm trying to think of my favorite pun. I really liked when Victor is sucked into the RV. Is it called RV? The vac.
The Bunvac 6000.
The Bunvac,
of course.
the BV, the Bunvac. There's a string of puns that happen.
Oh
and
yeah.
It was like,
I'd like
what is it?
to pay.
I'd like to pay.
Oh, we accept cash or check.
yeah, and then he's
No,
like,
my hair.
my hair.
There's only rabbits in there. Hairs are much larger.
yeah. And I love that. I still love that. You know.
I like when Lady Toddington is showing Wallace the vegetable garden that she has on her ceiling. And she says, Victor never took an interest in my produce while standing in front of two very round squashes.
My produce.
Which is a nice combination of the visual gag.
That is a visual gag. I did like that.
Verbal pun.
I think the difference is that that's a static visual gag. You know what I mean? And there are more of these like static visual gags, right? Like the dogfight sign or like the buy your angry mob supplies here. Like these are visual, yes, but they're not so visually interesting.
They also do kind of have a double beat of that breast as produce gag, because later on a man says that his wife's cauliflower were ravaged in the night and she holds the two cauliflower just so. But clearly it does work twice, so.
Yeah.
It does. I would say the one that gave me the most laughs was the Reverend.
Oh my God.
Even from that first scene where he gets attacked by the were-rabbit and he's using the carrots to form a crucifix, like in that POV shot, I like lost it. It was so funny. And also the way that he was acting in like the chapel later on. Great character.
When he's blessing his vegetables for the competition and he finishes it by sprinkling holy water on them. Unbelievable. It's such a small thing.
Yeah. He was also like praying for everyone, but then he was like, but I want to win. Yeah. Something like that. He was like, go no, but mine better. Yeah, please God, make my vegetables bigger. Like very covetous of him, you know?
This is not even a joke that I think gets spoken in the movie, but the name of the police constable is PC Macintosh.
Yes.
I was looking at that cast list, I was confused. I was like, who is this guy?
PC Macintosh.
There is a great visual gag with him, which is when he takes off his hat.
Oh my God.
And his head is the shape of his hat. And I was like, whoa, wait, what's going on here?
I think you are right, Eli, that the supporting characters or the ensemble really makes up for, I guess, the longer run. It like makes it worth it. And just building out the world of the town that they're in a little more makes it feel less contained, which was quite nice. I want to talk about fur a little bit.
Yeah.
I am curious about how they work this out. Once again, there are like some things in this that I'm like, wow, how does this work? Like how like hair, like fur moves in like the wind, and how do you capture that in stop motion? We have a lot of sequences with the big rabbit, and it's obviously not clay, but it's definitely still stop motion, I think. It just felt very smooth, and I wanted to ask or just talk about it or just marvel at it.
So in a behind the scenes featurette, it shows the process of how they made it. The problem is, as Wilson's noting, how do you make fur move without making it clear that your fingers have molded the fur? So it was a combination of solutions. One was that they had to order this very special 4-way stretch fake fur plasticine that could kind of hold its shape and keep the fur in place. And also, the were-rabbit had to be articulated with a metal skeleton and these kind of ports where a metal rod could adjust the were-rabbit without the fur being touched. They also had to make multiple models of the were-rabbit, including one especially for when it's bounding from yard to yard and running from place to place. That was an entirely different set of problems to solve how do you make it run and bounce? Just the level of problem solving that has to happen at Aardman is crazy.
Yeah. Just because they chose a fluffy animal.
Yup.
I feel like that's what you need to do when you do like stop motion and claymation. You always have to challenge yourself to do like a thing that looks hard to do. And I think I see the other studios tend to try to do that as well. Where like there's always one, in a sense, a kind of a gimmick to like challenge the studio to be like, how would we do fur with clay? You know, how would we do water with, like water is hard. Like there's no water in this at all.
There's water droplets in this. There's
Droplets,
rain.
yes.
When Victor is speaking threateningly in Wallace's face, droplets of spittle appear on Wallace's face.
But like waves, no, that's hard.
They're tears.
Yeah.
Waves of tears.
Waves of tears.
All right, let's talk about the genre here.
Yeah.
Because we mentioned horror, but there's also a lot of other things going on. It's a monster movie in the sense of like King Kong, which
Werewolf
is less
thriller.
of a horror movie, werewolf thriller. There's a huge King Kong reference at the end.
Yes.
Yes, there is.
And it's also kind of an action movie, as they usually are for Wallace and Gromit. Mystery.
And kind of like a romance, huh?
And
A little
romance.
bit.
Yeah, it's a lot going on here,
romance.
which is kind of fun.
This is maybe the most types of genres that it's combined into one, which is probably afforded by the longer runtime.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Little science fiction.
Yeah, I'm interested in how the genre work will continue in Vengeance Most Fowl this year.
Yeah.
And what, because these are the only two feature film Wallace and Gromit films, right? Everything else has been short form. And I wonder how it's going to change.
I wonder if it would be different if it was more focused in its use of genre. Like how it would be different.
If it just chose one genre.
Or like
Or
fewer
two
genres to
play
focus on.
on.
Like if it was more like, I mean, it's tough because it still needs to be broadly a comedy across the board, right? There's no way this is going to be like serious. There's no serious Wallace and Gromit movie coming out ever. And
I'm just imagining the live action adaptation, like the
Gritty reboot.
gritty reboot.
Yeah.
Because I think of the at a runtime, they had to do more stuff by like pulling from these different toolboxes to generate more comedic ideas and more things to riff off. Whereas like with the shorts, with the shorter runtime, just having one of these things, you can kind of do the whole thing. Like this is just a heist movie for, let's say, The Wrong Trousers, or A Close Shave is kind of like Terminator or something. I don't know, like kind of a sci-fi mystery thing. But even then, those still use a lot of genres to do the shorts. This one's just like done a little bit more.
The next Wallace and Gromit short after Curse of the Were-Rabbit is A Matter of Loaf and Death, which is so called because they're bakers in that one.
Of course.
And that one is a serial killer thriller.
Wait, what?
Yep.
What? Oh my gosh.
That's dark.
And there's
Geniuses.
actual murder happening.
Whoa.
What? Oh.
Now I really want to see it.
It's good.
I also want to like put it on the table that it's hard to talk about comedy. Like I think as a film podcast, we're used to talking about directorial choices. Those are sort of like visual gags. Those are like moments, right? But a lot of like dialogue heavy comedy, we're just like, oh, this line was really nice. And I like not to just like, play 4D chess with our podcast, but I'm just like, oh, I'm realizing that we maybe like, I don't know, I need to change my approach to like talking about these kind of comedy films. But with talking about comedy stuff, we also have like the craft of the whole thing. So I think,
I mean, with comedy, it's always about the construction and I guess what is your goal with the film, right? I think it's not that we've never covered comedy before. We have covered comedy before.
Yeah, Birth.
But I'm your husband. So funny. Anyway, like I was thinking more of the romantic comedies we've talked about before.
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, but of course, the thing is, to Birth.
Well, those are also movies with a set of toolboxes that the directors
Yes.
can choose to deploy or subvert or just ignore.
I think the tough thing about something like The Curse of the Were Rabbit and Wallace and Gromit in general is because when you do parody, the punchline is about the inversion of what you already expect. And once you receive that inversion, you're like, oh, okay, the point of this was to kind of poke fun at that inversion. Like, this is the point. You know, but the construction, the craft is in how well you ape and copy those tools. Like, we talked at length about the heist as well as the chase in the shorts. And those are genre toolboxes that he used and applied very well that are about expectation and about crafting action. And so I think here, yes, the chief goal is comedy, but there needs to be stuff that you do to give you the sense that this is horror, that this would scare kids, because it does scare kids. So it is using those horror toolbox, but they're just not working the same way that they usually work on you, especially with us as adults, right? Like, it's not scary, but we can see the resemblance to those horror tools, which is really interesting.
We've seen through Michael Myers' eyes and been legitimately scared. And when we see through a giant rabbit's eyes, it's a different experience.
You can see that they're building the suspense, right? The way that the narrative is structured, for example. Right, okay, who is the rabbit? They're asking these questions. So narratively, it's well structured in that sense of like, who is the were-rabbit? You know it's somebody in something that happened because of Wallace. But you're like, most likely it's Hutch, and they try and set Hutch up. But if you're old enough, you know that that's completely a red herring, but maybe you might be tricked.
If you're old enough.
Yeah, maybe it'll trick you.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're a smart child.
Yeah. The kind of inversion and reveal that actually the were-rabbit is Wallace, which completely makes sense after you realize what you've seen, right? Is part of that kind of narrative inversion, which is kind of this monster movie kind of rug pull that is kind of nice and well structured. Yeah.
And they let you realize it before they show you, which is always so effective, because if you follow the clues and figure it out, even slightly before Gromit, you feel smart when that payoff comes. And it's very rewarding to see that ultimate transformation, because then you can just focus on the technical marvel of, oh my gosh, this clay hand is sprouting fur all of a sudden, which that I have no idea how they did.
I really like that moment when Gromit has that realization when he's in that car and he turns around. He has and I think it really works because he's a non-dialogue speaking character. And a lot of those horror movie realizations of I guess the victim or not, someone that's not the monster always happens in the eyes. And the eyes in that moment of Gromit's realization were just spot on recreation or parody of horror actor's performance.
Like when he opens the door to Wallace's room to find what in other movies would be human carnage, but here it's just vegetables chewed into. And he's recoiling against the wall.
Yeah.
I think that chalking this up to the sense of humor just being homages to other genres and films is underselling it a little bit. There's still, even here, originality and inventiveness, and in particular, setup and payoff. I'm thinking about things like the were-rabbit suit, the golden carrot, the townspeople, the dog, the space of the garden on the roof, all of those things that get set up earlier in the movie pay off in the climax. Gromit's giant zucchini, the truck, Hutch, cheese, all of these things come back in the finale.
Jeez.
I also think about how geographically clear Nick Park's action sequences tend to be. Like the train chase in The Wrong Trousers, we've been through that living room space. In A Close Shave, it's just straight down the road. In Curse of the Were-Rabbit, there's this sort of parallel chase going on with Gromit in the truck and the were-rabbit through the gardens. Maybe the climax is the least geographically clear, but it's kind of circling around Toddington Manor.
Yeah, even I think it is kind of clear because you have the planes riding on the I don't know what you call it.
On the side of the building.
The side of the building, which is the manor,
Yeah.
right? And because the center of the manor is where Totti's special vegetables are, her secret garden.
Yes.
And also where Wallace goes and brings her there as well.
Yeah, I think rather than it being a space that you explore like left and right, it's like more of like a height dimension. With
true.
The townspeople at the bottom looking up at the action that's happening overhead. And I think that also allows for like all that plane stuff with Gromit and the other dog to work with everything else.
There's a bunch of great gags with the plane stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I say it's not as dense, but it is, that part is really fun. Like there's this random part where the plane, which is actually a carnival ride, runs out of coins and stops moving. And then they pause their flight so that they could put coins in and then they immediately continue. Very
And
British
the other dog's
humor.
purse is so cute.
Yeah.
And Wallace like raises his eyebrows a little bit, and then Philip, the other dog, is like, "Arr."
I think within these individual sequences, they find a lot of opportunities to make a joke. You know, even like a completely offhand, irrelevant, inconsequential joke, and they will do it. You know, whether it's like a word or like a random gag. And I like that about the film. So even though it is longer than the shorts, it is still a very dense, joke-heavy film. And throughout the film, I'm smiling all the way through because it's just like a delight.
Same. They're also packed with reversals, right? Like who's winning the action sequence always goes back and forth in these movies. I love the moment where Mrs. Mulch is fleeing the vegetable competition with her giant pumpkin.
Yeah.
And everyone's saying, come back, come back. And then they see her turn around because she's fleeing the were-rabbit burrowing under the ground.
Yeah.
And they go from come back to go away, go away.
Go away, go away.
I feel like we kind of elided over the early sequence, which I really like, which is when the rabbit is pulling the car and it goes underground.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a great sequence. I mean, it's a much more contained sequence because once it goes underground, it's got all these like jokes about mud. There's so many
loam
jokes about mud, like the anti-loam. And then at the end, when he finally gets the car out of the ground and then he gets the car to shake like a dog, but then he does like anti-mud or something like that.
Yeah,
which is like, why does your car have that? Like, how often does this happen? Yeah.
You have a lasso that pops out of the hood of the car.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The lasso.
But that's pretty extensive early action sequence where like they're tearing through the town like crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and going through everybody's vegetables, like just destroying the vegetables. And there are so many blink and you miss it, like tiny gags, like people who have like prized vegetables, which are like just way tiny compared to anyone else's. You know, like you have like a variety of size of anti-pesto traps. Right?
Yes,
and, like,
I love the little anti-pestos.
So I really like the variation with that. Like the town feels very varied in that there's all these different people and they have different kinds of vegetables that they're into and like different ways to send them in the gardens. There isn't like a copy and paste feeling to the way this town is built. Like it does feel quite unique with each backyard. And like, even though, yes, they kind of operate as a mob, but I think if you were to kind of look at the characters, they do feel different. Like they're different sets. And I think if you were to watch it a few times, you start to be able to recognize who's who and like what's their vibe.
I definitely feel that way. It's fun to see Mrs. Mulch again and the vicar, who's so goofy.
The vicar. Maybe the difference is that, like, I think in the second act, we just get less contraption hijinks, if I'm not wrong. Because we're like fully in the who is the were-rabbit kind of situation. And it's more about relationships rather than like how things work. And so I think I missed some of that during that second act where like I just want to like see funny, weird things. Right. The first act has a lot more like contraptions, and the last act has like not just contraptions, but also different fun physical elements like the plane and the location of the climax, which is the manor. Like there's more stuff going on there. So I think the middle section where it's more about like figuring out who the were-rabbit is like slightly like sags for me in that sense. because
Yeah.
there's less literal inventiveness.
It also becomes about physical comedy at those passages because Wallace is often needing to cover up the fact that he's the were-rabbit to Lady Toddington and to Victor Quartermain. So, I mean, that those parts are very funny and they're very well staged and played out. Like all the transformation that Wallace is going through at his door when Lady Toddington is there and he's trying to
Yes, I really like that
transform in front of her. But also that kind of thing is normally better suited to human actors, right? Like seeing people undergo those things.
Yeah, but that's why it feels so familiar. And it, like you say, it does work. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about that last like face that Wallace does in the window after he closes the door and he goes, "Blah!" or something like that in the window. To Toddy. I lost it when I saw that. So such a great moment.
But I think there is still pleasure in seeing how these clay faces make those expressions.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Definitely. Because at the end of the day, these characters have some weird ass proportions. You know, they look freaking funny. So it's like, these are not human faces. So how do you make them give human expressions that you can still clearly read? And so I think there's a lot of craft that goes into how, even with 2D animation, like when you have a weird looking character, like think about like Phineas and Ferb, they're like literal triangles.
Yes.
Right? Like how do you make them have readable emotions? And it is always so interesting to me, like how like we can give inanimate, non-human looking things, you can like see the emotion in them. Like I always find it very fascinating. And so Wallace has this weird face. What do you call this? He looks kind of like a dildo. You think about it, like his mouth is like wide and he's got like a knob. Like think about that. And so he's like this weird face, but like the fact that he can like have like so many different emotions with his gigantic mouth and like extremely small forehead, and that we can read it as like human emotions that we can map to how we see it from other people is really interesting.
Or man, the rabbits, the emotion on the rabbits.
Yeah. If I think about animation too hard, it kind of scares me. It freaks me out.
Why?
Like you were talking, like it's exactly what you were saying with the inanimate objects and like putting emotion onto them. Like it scares me. It kind of scares me.
Intellectually?
Like just, intellectually, conceptually, and maybe like, I don't know, physically, like they're like beings, right? They have souls. In a sense.
It's just how your brain is wired. Your brain is wired to think these things are animate, even though you know rationally they're not animate, that they're not real. You know what I mean?
No, they have souls.
Yeah, they're souls.
It's freaky. It's kind of freaky.
Mad God, on the other hand, their souls are not good.
I forgot that
was
stop
an
motion.
unforgettable. Yeah, that was an unforgettable movie watching experience with Eli Sands.
It is crazy that, I mean, weird tangent that we're on right now. Completely different kind of movie. Like to watch a film like Mad God that uses what we think of as pretty like childlike, not genre, but style, which is stop motion, for something so like putrid and disgusting.
Yeah.
Right. That's like, that's sick. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's sick. It is sick.
Yeah.
That's also why I want to watch The Wolf House. Isn't The Wolf House
Yeah,
sort of
Wolf
like
House
that
is
as well?
great. Wolf House is so great.
Gosh.
It is a Chilean film from a few years ago that is stop motion, but it's not so much figurine stop motion. It's more within the space of various rooms. And it sort of tells a story about a particular religious group that thrived under the dictator Pinochet's reign in Chile in the 20th century, in the 80s.
Wow.
So it's dark, it's elusive, but it's very compelling. I remember really being wowed by it.
I don't like this poster. It's freaking me out.
It's very freaky.
But also reminded me of another filmmaker we've already covered who's done stop motion before-ish. Todd Haynes with his first film.
Oh, Superstar.
Yeah.
Karen Carpenter story.
Which, I mean,
that's
Barbie
devastating.
dolls.
I cried.
Oh,
I cried watching
And Barbie
that
dolls
movie.
can't even change their faces.
No.
You know? You think about that. But you are able to still use something as inarticulate, like literally, like physically inarticulate as a Barbie doll and like imbue it with humanity. Like
Wilson's like
It's
writhing.
scary.
it is scary, but it's like cool.
You need to make a horror. Someone needs to make a horror film about this.
There's Oddity.
Chucky's kind of like that already. Like puppets are scary.
From this year, there's Oddity.
Oh, okay.
Oddity is oh no, wait. I got the title wrong. It's not Oddity. It's okay. What? It's called Stop Motion.
Oh, love the title.
Why?
Love the title.
A talented stop motion animator becomes consumed by the grotesque world of her horrifying creations with deadly results.
Love that. Someone took my fears and made them into a film.
I feel like there's a conversation to be had that I'm not equipped for, which is like how comedy works compared to horror. Because we talk about how this is scary to kids, right? But what does the film do that makes you not feel like it is scary, even though it is also scary? You know what I mean?
To me, part of the DNA in common is that both are genres that rely heavily on setup and payoff and subverting what you expect is going to happen. So a really effective joke partially surprises you, even though you expect it to happen. And really effective horror, you're expecting something bad to happen, but it's worse than you could have imagined.
Yeah.
So I think maybe the answer to that question here, Ben, is that the payoff is not worse than you imagined. And though the characters find it fearsome, we are amused because the stakes are so low. It's their vegetables.
Yeah.
But I think here's the thing that's interesting. So there's this class that none of us took at Wesleyan about comedy.
Yes.
But I know one phrase from that class, which is the idea of the margin of safety.
Yes.
Right? Which the best I can try to explain it, which is like with comedy, there's this idea that you create a margin of safety such that, for example, if I were to stab somebody and I show you a video of that, that's going to be very scary. But if you were to be able to craft a film where the margin of safety is that stabbing someone is funny, like you can create a situation in which it's okay. So the margin of safety is that it's okay to laugh at something as gruesome as getting stabbed. So you would need to create some kind of environment in which you define the margin of safety as like, this is comedic and this is not. And so a lot of it's about stakes and about what's actually dangerous. Think about like Gromit flying through the air and getting shot with the golden carrot. One version of this is that he literally dies, right? That's completely possible if it was not a Wallace and Gromit film. But you could pull that film into that direction. But you know that when he gets shot by that, he's not going to die. Like there's no way that he's going to be hurt because you know that that's how the film operates. But even then, there is a sense of suspense because like there's a moment when like you're like, where's Gromit? Because the plane flies and crashes in the ground into a heap of flames. So for 10 seconds, I'm like, okay, how does Gromit get out of that? Even though I'm not necessarily suspenseful in terms of like, oh my God, is he dead? But there is a feeling of suspense of like, how do we solve that problem? Even though I feel safe, I know Gromit's going to be okay. I'm still in this suspense state, thinking about how he gets out of it. So I think there's this interesting thing where like when you do something like parody, like using these horror tools or even the action tools, and yet have it happen within the world that feels safe. Like that's kind of like fun. It's kind of like playing with toys.
It's also that margin of safety is co-created with the audience and what they bring into the movie as acceptable. And the question in a moment like that, where Gromit's life is theoretically in danger, is the movie going to violate the margin of safety that we have co-set together? Another way to think about this is the academic Paul Santilli has an idea about the cultural matrix, particularly pertaining to horror, that the cultural matrix of a particular group decides what is good and what is bad, or good and evil, or acceptable and unacceptable. And horror is what hovers somewhere in between. Hard to categorize, separate from evil. But because it does not fit into that binary, it is intellectually and emotionally horrifying. Maybe humor also hovers in between those two things, because the margin of safety, you do need to push past it a little bit. Think of the moment in Burn After Reading, spoiler alert, when all of a sudden Brad Pitt is graphically shot in the head. And yet, it's a really funny moment.
Yeah.
Weirdly. Somehow that movie does the magic trick of pushing so far past the margin of safety it's established and keeping it really funny.
Yeah, I think it just happens that the world that a lot of the Coen brothers movies exist in have a very high margin of safety. Well, yeah, people die, but you're like, I don't know, it's a Coen Bros film.
I don't know. It depends on the film. Like when death happens in No Country, that's not a good feeling.
Right,
you know?
true.
And so
And
I
it
think
often happens in a similarly abrupt way.
Yeah. So I think this is actually a very fascinating thing, which is like comedy and horror are, and people talk about this, which like there are two sides of the same coin. They operate in the same way. They have setups and payoffs and inversions and surprises. Except the goal of those things is different. And that's why there's a lot of horror parodies, generally speaking. Like think about Scary Movie. Even so-called classic horror movies have a feeling of comedy, right? There's something ridiculous about the killer having a very specific outfit. You can watch these films with a higher margin of safety when you're looking for a thrill or when you've already become very familiar with them because it's like fun to like be scared. So you're scared, but you're also not quite scared. So it is interesting how this is a comedy, this being Curse of the Were-Rabbit, and it trying to be a horror movie in a sense. And I can understand how it scares kids because kids have a lower understanding of the meta context of what they're watching.
Yeah.
And so for them, they have maybe a slimmer margin of safety because they're taking what they're seeing more literally. And so it's like scarier because they're not thinking about the fact that, oh, actually everything's gonna be fine. You know, they're like, oh my God, things are bad right now. They're not thinking about all the movies they've seen that look like this and they know how it's going to turn out. They have no idea what's going to happen. And so that's way scarier. They have no idea that the were-rabbit is most likely Wallace until they find out it's Wallace. They have no idea if Wallace will ever become normal again because they're like, oh my God, he's a rabbit now, right? They can't fathom at that point when you're a child the ability to go back to status quo, right? Because it shifts. So I find it very fascinating to just think about.
Yeah. And I think the experience that you get watching these childhood films where things end up being okay, sort of like ingrain that in us for maybe basically in preparation for adult cinema where they don't get their way sometimes and they riff on the status quo and the classic plot structure of these films.
And I think that's why when you watch like what is called a kid's film and it has something especially tragic in it, that is always very surprising. Like the number of Pixar tearjerkers, they're just like, people gonna die.
But I think those early movies that make us cry are so memorable and effective because even before Pixar, for me at least, like I'm thinking of Fiddler on the Roof and Titanic, which demolished me as a kid. I was a very sensitive
Titanic
child,
is not a kid's movie.
You're watching... that's what I'm going to
That's movies in that film.
I was, as a topic, obsessed with the Titanic. Like, I learned everything I could about it. So my parents showed me the okay to watch scenes from it. I also was fascinated by the Hindenburg. You're learning too much about me.
This is like the learn about Eli's childhood. This is so telling.
Yep. But those early ones that make you cry, you've hopefully at a young age not experienced huge, immediate, visceral loss. And those movies act as a way to train for those feelings, I think. So it feels devastating.
So not just training for adult films, it's training for life.
I do feel that way. And I feel that way about horror too. It's sort of a more extreme way to push your own margin of safety in the world. And ultimately, Paul Santilli argues for the idea that we can come to accept and welcome and show love for the things that previously would horrify the cultural matrix, things that violate the binary of good and evil. That we can expand what we accept and are okay with.
That sounds very scary. Is that good? Is that good? Like, I have no idea.
In some cases, I can see cases where it would be bad. I think maybe the cultural matrix right now in America is being expanded in a way that's not so good.
Right.
Anyway,
this conversation went in such a weird direction. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, like fascinating. Like, I mean, I feel like we didn't talk about the film that much, but it is interesting to think about how comedy operates, and like especially with something as like kind of slapstick as Wallace and Gromit is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like broad humor. How do you find the craft in that? Like, how do you talk about it in a, I guess you could call it intellectual way, but you can definitely, I think.
Are we intellectuals? I don't know.
No.
Maybe.
I'm not.
Might be.
I guess it's not for us to say. Are we geniuses? I don't know. I didn't say it. I didn't suggest it.
Eli, thank you so much for bringing Nick Park to the podcast. It was so lovely discovering these films late in life. I'm not dying. Later in life.
Yeah, I really enjoyed getting to see you experience them for the first time and see them click with you, especially the original shorts, was such a delight.
Mm-hmm. And I can't wait for the next Wallace and Gromit film that's coming out later this year that we'll definitely cover here on the podcast.
I mean, with a title like that, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
It's a great title.
Vengeance Most Fowl.
FOWL.
But R.I.P. Peter Sallis.
Yeah.
We'll see. Well, we could talk about that voice performance next episode.
It's always solid.
Sallis is solid. Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show and helps others discover the show as well. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. Keep up with Deep Cut on Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod, and TikTok at DeepCutPod_film. You can also join us to talk about movies, TV, music, claymation on our Discord server. There's a link in the description. We now also have a Patreon. If you want to subscribe for free, there's exclusive content there, and you get early access to our episodes. We would deeply appreciate you taking a look at that. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials we've mentioned here. Thank you to our Deep Cut Pick supporter, Leah Lai. Deep Cut is hosted and produced by us, Wilson Lai, Benjamin Yap, and Eli Sands. Our cover art is designed by Justina Yam, and our theme song is composed by me, Eli Sands.
I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli. Take care. And we're looking forward to talking about more movies and cheese with you next time. Smashing.